Welcome to the Sustainable Living Podcast, everyone. This is episode 154. Yay! I am so pleased to tell you that today I have Teri Page on the podcast, and she is also known as Homestead-Honey, has a blog for a long, long time talking about everything homesteading. She has lived off grid, like no running water and stuff for a long time and still managed to raise two children in without running water and write several books, of course also keeping up with her blog. Her newest book is about homesteading with children, and that's why we asked her back on. She was a previous guest, and I will link the previous show where we are talking more about her life in that off-grid homestead in the show notes. So if you are listening to this on a podcast, go to our website, sustainablelivingpodcast.com, and you will find the previous show as well. Now, please enjoy the show with Teri. Hi, Teri. I'm so happy that you're on the Sustainable Living Podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Teri was here before, and it's over 100 episodes ago because I looked on,
Wow.
a long time ago. I looked on the podcatchers, and they only take up to 100 episodes they keep. So if you want to listen to our last interview with Teri, that was with Janice, and you have to go to our website to see it. But since then, there have been a lot of changes going on. So, Teri, when you were talking to us last time, where were you living then?
Yeah, we were living in Northeast Missouri, in a tiny little town on a little off-grid homestead.
And where are you now?
Yeah, well, about a month ago, we moved to north central Vermont, the Montpelier area. And right now we're renting, but we have a beautiful, beautiful spot on a 60-acre property, and it's just beautiful. So we're still very much homesteading, but we're renting for a little bit while we figure out if this is the area for us and if this is where we want our next home to be.
Yeah, I think right there you're giving a really good tip. If you relocate, you want to rent for a while to see if that is actually where you want to be before making that big investment of buying land and a house and so forth.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's completely different than how we did things in Missouri. And, not that that was bad, but we just like jumped full in. We bought the land. We didn't live there at the time. We bought the land and then we showed up and we just started building. And, a few years later, we were like, oh, this is an amazing place, but this isn't actually where we're going to be long term. So no regrets. Of course, you learn by experience and by life, but it is kind of interesting. I often wonder what would have happened if we had like gone there for a year first and settled in, if we would have continued to build or if we would have decided, oh no, let's move on to someplace else. So yeah, renting is helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to look back and say what if, right? And
no, just can't.
Yeah, you can. So, but you have the experience now of having done one way to kind of pick the spot on the map and say, okay, that's where we're going and doing it. And you were very successful doing it. But there were things which didn't fit. I read your blog, so I know a little bit what your decision was.
Yeah,
but
you read it.
Homesteading like you did, you were living off grid, you were basically feeding your family from what you were producing there, or mostly. That took a lot of work, and it's a lot of infrastructure you put in, so it's not an easy thing to leave that behind and move on. So I kind of, if you could go a little bit into what was your decision making and how did you go about making that decision, and then what was the outcome?
Yeah, I mean, we could have a whole hour-long discussion just about the process of making decisions, because I feel like,
and maybe,
maybe
I can have you on for another podcast. I would love that, because I think that's like a missing piece a lot of times. But today we actually, and I'm going to foreshadow here a little bit, Teri wrote a book, and we are going to talk about that a lot today because it's a fantastic book. But before we get into that, I wanted to pick your brain on,
yes.
on your move and everything.
We're going to set the stage for the current reality. Okay, so the short version is just we have 2 children, and we were homeschooling in Missouri, and we were homeschooling together with another family. A few years ago, we knew that they were going to be moving. We had already kind of come to the realization that although we loved Missouri, we loved the neighbors that we had and the community that we had there, that we just knew it wasn't our long-term home. It did take us quite some time to finally come to the decision of leaving because, like you said, we had built everything from scratch. It was a huge amount of work, a huge investment in time and energy and love. We really actually loved living the way we did. I mean, we love living off grid. We love just the simplicity of the lifestyle. It just was time to do something different, though. We just knew that we couldn't continue balancing all of the pieces that we had in place, you know, the living off grid, the running multiple businesses, homesteading, homeschooling kids. It just wasn't working. You know, all of that wasn't working. And unfortunately, I felt, because I was doing a lot of the homeschooling, I felt like the kids were sort of getting the short end of the stick. And it just was time to do something different. So we decided to actually look into school. Because we've been doing Waldorf-inspired homeschooling, we were actually looking for a Waldorf school. We also really wanted to move someplace where we already knew people. We actually did move to Missouri because we knew other people there. And that was a hugely important thing. I mean, just showing up in a new community is very challenging. So just to have some people there that you already know and love, supportive to us. And we sort of narrowed down, you know, what are the different states that we would be interested in living in, close to friends, close to family, supportive of the lifestyle that we want to live. And so we kind of narrowed it down. We came up with like either moving back to the West Coast where we had lived for like 17 years or so, or moving to Vermont. And we came out last summer. We spent the summer here in Vermont. We really liked it. And then we looked into the little Waldorf school that our kids are going to, and we really liked that a lot. Just all the pieces started falling into place. I mean, I say it so casually now, but there was a lot of like angst-ridden decision making. It was hard. It was hard to decide. So yeah, we just moved out here about a month ago, and our kids are going to a lovely school, and my husband and I are still continuing our businesses, still trying to homestead as much as possible. And, you know, we'll stay here in a rental for about a year, and then we'll kind of reassess and see what we want to do next.
I'm in awe of what you all do. I mean, I feel I run out of time all the time of, you know, with the projects I want to do. And my kids are grown. I don't have little kids, or even, you know, your kids are not that little, but they're still young.
Yeah.
Need a lot of time. And homesteading and running businesses, it's just mind-boggling. So I'm amazed what you all do. And writing a book.
It's a lot. Right. And writing a book.
That takes a lot of time and energy.
It does.
Actually, this has relationship to the book, because in the book you give lots and lots of ways how people can do homesteading tasks. One of them I'm actually wanting to do with my grandchildren. You talk about how to make butter in a mason jar, and that just you know, I mean, I have had relatives in the village when I grew up and stuff, but that was like big containers, and you know, they do the butter with a whatever, the stomper or whatever. Yeah. You know, so like a mason jar, what a great way to be able to do it with kids, right?
Yeah, it's such an easy thing to do. And, you know, one of the things I really tried to do with the book, and I try to do with my blog too, is just make things super accessible. So you don't feel like you have to go out and spend a ton of money and buy something, or you don't have to live on a huge piece of land, but you can just make these, you know, I call it homesteading activities, but really it's just a way to connect to your food source, connect to nature, you know, whatever it is that you're doing. So it's so simple. You just take cream and you put it in a jar, and you like literally just shake it up and it becomes butter. And it's so amazing, so simple, and so delicious that really anyone can do it.
And it brings it together, because if you see a piece of butter coming out of, the refrigerator and it's in a tin foil or whatever it's packaged in, it has no relationship to the cow, right? So the milk is a little
Right.
bit closer, or as a cream, where you can say, oh, this is actually part of that process. And then you get real
Mhm.
buttermilk too, which you can't basically not
Yep.
buy anymore.
Right, it's totally different. Buttermilk is not at all what you buy in the store, which is like creamy, and real buttermilk is a little bit more like
Right.
watery and kind of feels like whey. But yeah, you use it in baking and pancakes and stuff.
This brings me to a point I used to struggle with a lot, and maybe I'm still often think about it. And this is, what is the definition of a homesteader? In your mind, what makes a person a homesteader?
Yeah, I mean, I'm shaking my head. I don't know. I think this is just going to be audio, but I'm shaking my head because everybody asks me that, and I just feel like it is such a personal thing. There's no rule out there that says you must be doing this to be a homesteader. I mean, of course, historically, homesteading had a different definition. It was people going out and finding these portions of land that the government was making accessible, and then you had to like work the land. You had to clear trees and do farming and some sort of agriculture. But nowadays, people are homesteading on pieces of land. They're homesteading in apartments. They're homesteading in the city. They're homesteading in the country. I feel like I homestead wherever I go because I've developed a mindset. For me, it kind of starts with food. So I'm always thinking about, okay, how can I source food? How can I make things from scratch? What are the different wild edibles that are out here in this new environment that I can learn about? Being a homesteader it's a mindset and a skill set. And it's all about just like connecting to a deeper level of self-sufficiency, of being connected to nature, of producing, over consuming, and just kind of tying all those things into a package that makes sense for you and your family and your lifestyle.
Yeah, I love that because, it's a discussion which is going on a lot in the community. And for me personally,
Mm,
like a lot of the skills, even things we talk about in your book, like you talk about fermenting and making sauerkraut and making jam and
yep.
gardening and all of that stuff. That's how I grew up, right? So for me, that was like, that's what
Mm,
everybody does. And then,
right,
and I
right.
didn't grow up in the US. When I read about homesteading, it was like the little house on the prairie, right? I had this idea, you have
Uh-huh.
to have your land and you do everything yourself. I didn't feel like I could call myself a homesteader. And then I would see people which would do maybe bake their bread and say, oh, I'm homesteading. And so for a long time, I was really confused. What does
Mm,
that mean? And I like how you both said together. It's you figure out what it means to you, and it's really more a relationship with your environment and with your food and becoming. I think none of us are truly self-sufficient, or maybe a few people are. We all rely on others and rely on things
yeah.
out there.
Exactly. And maybe like self-reliance is a better word because I feel like you can rely on yourself to problem solve. You can rely on yourself to source things when you can't make them yourself. And also I think a lot about like community and interdependence. Yeah, self-sufficiency. It's funny because, my book ended up getting the subtitle of The Ultimate Guide to Self-Sufficiency for the Whole Family. But self-sufficiency it's not really something that I truly believe in because even when, my husband and I had no kids and we were like homesteading hardcore, the hardest core we were possibly able to homestead. And we were still, we're still going to the store. We're still buying things online. We're still getting things from our neighbors. And that's awesome. You have to support those networks because that's what makes us stronger.
Yeah, and I think that's why we as humans are community people. I mean, there
Mhm.
are a few people which can exist all by themselves in the mountains. But when you look back at our, like way back when we started out as human beings, it was family groups. It was
Yeah.
people working together for survivals.
Right.
Your definition is that we get into this creative problem solving mindset, maybe,
Yes. Yeah.
and then
Absolutely.
not be for everything relying on others.
Mhm.
I had a discussion with a lot of people said true self-sufficiency is almost impossible. You know, like you can't produce enough crops to make your own oils, and like a lot of things we just take for granted as part of our living.
Yes. You know what? You just would probably go crazy trying. Yeah. You just have to know what is okay to let go of. And, you know, I think for everybody, it's important to just start out with what is the most exciting and, you know, what you're most passionate about and what sounds fun to you and your family. Also, like, think about what would make the biggest impact in your life. For some people, you know, it might just be, like you said, baking bread. That might make the biggest impact in their life, is just making that bread, because not only is it healthy and delicious, it's also very meditative. So it might become something that, you know, brings you back to your center once a week, and you can calm down and take deep breaths as you're kneading your bread. I think it's really going to be different for every person.
Yeah, absolutely. What inspired you to put this book together? This is not your first book, right?
It's not my first book that I've written, but my other 4 books are just available online. Mm-hmm. So they're available in PDF form or Kindle. So this is the first book that I can actually like hold in my hand, and it's really exciting, actually.
And it's very beautiful.
Yeah. I'm very pleased with how it turned out. You know, I only saw previews online. I saw like PDF previews, and I was like, oh, that looks nice. But when you actually see it, the print quality is so high, and, you know, the photos just pop. So yeah, I'm very happy with how it turned out. So as far as what inspired this book, I've been an educator all my life in different ways, shapes, and forms. So my very first jobs out of college were teaching marine biology and ecology to kids. And I led backpacking trips with kids and taught dance to kids for many years, taught musical theater. And so I just have this long background of working in education and in sort of alternative forms of education, experiential outdoor education. And then, of course, I had my own kids. You know, all the homesteading things that we did with the kids, I saw how much they loved it and how much it kind of brought us together as a family doing these projects together, but also it helps us connect to the seasons and just connect to nature. I'm so passionate about homesteading in general. And I think that sometimes I know people write to me sometimes because I have my blog, Homestead-Honey. So I get a lot of emails from people, and, you know, sometimes they say, oh, I really want to do what you're doing, but I have young kids and, you know, blah, 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 I can't. You know, I think, oh, well, gosh, I mean, I've homesteaded with like from infancy. It just was always a part of what we did because we started homesteading 20 years ago. So it just always was a part of what we did. And so I thought, well, gosh, I have the experience, I have the skills, I have like actual practical advice to share with people. So I kind of just started writing ideas and coming up with thoughts about how I could put this into a book. And just as I was like getting ready to send out a sample table of content to publishers to see if I could get anyone interested, someone from Skyhorse Publishing contacted me and was like, you know, I saw your post about making butter with kids. And it was that post.
It was that post.
And she's like, and I was wondering if you might be interested in writing a book about homesteading with kids. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the universe. Like, it's speaking. I really feel like I manifested this book coming into creation. It just happened so serendipitously and so beautifully, because my editor is also a homesteader, and she's also an author who writes about homesteading. So she just really got the message that I wanted to share, and it felt like such a great partnership.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's a little bit the power of clarity, and you have been talking about the power of clarity in different venues. Mm-hmm. Your move was also the power of clarity. Said you really thought about it and focused. And
yes,
I'm thinking when you get emails of moms with young children, and granted, when I had my first baby, I was very anemic and I was very tired. Just even feeding myself seemed overwhelming, and I had zero support. You already talked about how important support is for everything, so especially when you have young children. But I wonder if some of those people feel like I felt, that you have to do everything.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know, I bet you're right. And that makes me feel so sad because I feel like there is a little bit of like this myth of homesteading that's kind of been perpetuated out there in the internet world or by books or whatever. But if someone came to me and they said, "Oh, I have an infant and I'm so tired and I just don't see how I can do anything," what I would say to them is, then don't. Don't.
Right.
Like right now, this is not your season. This is not your season for homesteading. Or I would say pick one thing. Pick one thing that'll bring you joy, that'll actually like make you come alive and have more energy. And maybe that is just like making a new batch of sauerkraut each week, or making some kombucha, and then just enjoy the time that you have with your young kids and go outside. That's the other thing I would say. Go for walks, go outside with the kids, look at the plants, maybe start to identify some things that might be edible. That is something that's so easy. You don't have to go and buy materials or clean up a mess. All you do is walk outdoors and see what might be in your backyard. Something as simple as like a dandelion, right? It's medicinal, it's edible, it's beautiful.
Right.
So just thinking about very, very simple ways that you could still bring that beauty and the connection of nature that homesteading brings into your life, but not shaming yourself, not beating yourself up about not being able to do it all.
Yeah, maybe it's a female approach to it because, when you go in different forums, it seems there's like a division between, young male homesteaders or permaculturists, which are like high energy and very, well, I don't know, this might sound judgmental, but they are judgmental in many ways, and then you're coming more from the female energy of do what we can do, right?
Yeah.
And I love that you just mentioned the foraging, because that's a real entry people can do.
Totally.
Do you want to talk a little bit about, especially, I mean, this is some city people can do because there's so much going. I'm in San Diego, Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
There are yards and yards with fruit trees where nobody harvests them. Like so much food out there. And so it's a really good way to get into the foraging. But what do you want to be careful of, especially in a city?
Yeah, well, okay. So with foraging, the main things are like, number one, do you have permission to even be on the property? I never would recommend that you trespass. So that aside, number two, with foraging, especially with kids, you just have to have a 100% certainty that you've identified the food correctly. And with fruit trees, an orange, a lemon tree, those are pretty simple. But when you get into certain plants, berries in particular, mushrooms, there are fatal mistakes that can be made. So you always want to be foraging either with a great guidebook or, an expert, and make sure that you can really safely identify those. And then, once you've made sure that you are not trespassing and you've got things safe, you also, especially in cities, this might be a concern. Like, I like to really keep an eye on the environment, and is this food going to be covered in dust or dirt from the road? Is it near, for instance, a railroad track where coal cars might be coming through it? It might be covered with a layer of coal. Or is it on a right of way where they might be coming through with herbicides? So you also want to be mindful of that kind of stuff too, because you don't want to get sick eating wild foods. And then, really it's so fun. I spent several years down in Southern California too, because I was working out on Catalina Island.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I know. It was beautiful. And one of the things we would do out there with the kids was to collect prickly pear cactus. They grow everywhere, right? I mean, so many of the kids had never tried them before. So we would get a fruit and we scrape the little thorns off and we'd cut it up into pieces, and, everyone would get to try it, and they just loved it. It was so much fun. So it's a great way. Foraging is a great way for kids to get introduced to the idea of homesteading.
Yeah, for sure. And for adults too, like the cactus you mentioned, it's so healthy. Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
The pats of yeah, so say they're like nopales, so you can shoot them and do all sorts of different things. And so
Yeah.
many people have them growing in the yard and don't understand
Yeah.
that there's a pharmacy right there.
I know. I know. Yeah, and rosemary grows really well down there. Herbs. It's such a wonderful, the Mediterranean climate. You get so many of those herbs, which you can use in the kitchen, but they're also medicinal too. I had a funny experience once going in Southern California because my sister-in-law still lives there. And I was walking around the block with Ella when she was a baby, and I came upon this tree. It was this fig tree dripping with figs, and they're falling onto the sidewalk. And so, of course, I'm down there like eating figs off the ground. And, later on, I was telling my sister-in-law, she was like, oh, that house is, and it was some famous actor. I can't remember who it was at the time. She's like, oh, yeah, that was his house. So I got to enjoy the figs off the sidewalk. But yeah, there's so much to enjoy.
And like you said, if you go into the property, it's a good idea to ask. And I have people knock on my door all the time. I put on purpose fruiting trees along my property lines, so people can pick them if they want to. And I think the foraging law is that as far as your hand can reach from like
the sidewalk, exactly. Yeah.
But still, some people would feel pretty offended if you reach into the yard.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. And that's why I was picking figs off the sidewalk.
And it's a shame because so many of those fruit do not get harvested.
Right.
At least here, nonprofit organizations which go out and harvest, and they're fully insured, because that's one thing. A lot of times people don't want you to come in. They're afraid you get hurt and then they're liable.
Right. And public lands can sometimes be an option too, but you need to actually look into the specific public land.
Yeah.
State parks, all those kinds of things. They all seem to have different rules about what they allow. So that might be another option too.
I like to talk about public land and state parks and so forth, because there are people which do a lot of foraging, some of them even for their own income. Do you want to talk a little bit about what is proper technique or proper etiquette when you go out in the wilderness and forage?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, you really do need to look specifically into that specific public land, because I was starting to look into it for the book. And I was hoping that I would just come up with like a general guideline, like, oh, in wilderness areas you can do this, and in state parks you can do this. And it's not uniform. One state might have a different rule than another state. So if you're thinking about going into a particular area, you really need to look at those specific guidelines. But the foraging rules is like, you don't want to take all of the food, right? So if you come across this amazing stand of, let's just say, prickly pear cactus, you don't want to strip the cactus of the fruit, because you're not leaving any for anyone else. You're not leaving any for wildlife. You're not leaving any to go to seed and perpetuate the populations. I can't remember what the exact number was I gave in the book, if it was 1/3, no more than 1/3, or no more than 1/4 of what you see there. But you just want to be mindful that you're not the only person or being that uses that. And yeah, as far as foraging for income, that when I was doing the research, I came across some public spaces that said foraging for your own consumption is fine, but foraging for commercial purposes is not fine. So you need to just do the homework and figure out what's okay.
Yeah, I forgot what it was, but there was some root which got almost extinct because people foraged it so much and it became very valuable, and then it's not there anymore. And I think that's so much what kind of consumer society is about in many ways, to use up the resources. Seems like that the homesteading mindset is to work with nature. So maybe that's also one thing to put into the equation. What is a homestead?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Because as a homesteader, especially somebody who's taking their homesteading interests into the realm of caring for animals or growing food, like, nature is in charge. That's just that. You have no control over whether it's going to rain or freeze or be sunny or any of those things. You just have no control. And so you just have to really get into this sort of Zen space of just accepting what is and doing your best to work within the gifts of what nature is providing us.
For sure. And I think once you are there on the land in your stewardship, it's in your best interest to always be regenerative and watch
Right.
out for that, because that's where your next year's food is coming from. You can't just,
Right.
leave, burn and leave, or however you want to call it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
To come back to your book here, you were interviewing quite a few other homesteaders. So how did you
Mhm.
find the people?
Yeah. Well, I know. So when I started to write, I really felt like it was important to bring the voices in of some other people who are homesteading with kids, particularly because I only have a 10 and a 7-year old. So I haven't been working with older kids at all, but I know people who are. And so I wanted to hear, their voice a little bit more in the book. And then it just seemed to make sense to have these homestead family profiles throughout the whole entire book. So at the end of each chapter, you'll find at least one, sometimes two profiles of people. And as far as how I found them, a lot of them are colleagues of mine, people that are also homestead bloggers and writers, really generous with their time and, more than happy to be involved in the project, which was really great. And I mean, gosh, they're all really amazing. I have one of my friends who I've worked with in my coaching business, Elisa. She lives out on Salt Spring Island in British Columbia with her 2 daughters, and they're homeschooling and homesteading, and they just have such a lovely way of using the homestead as the ground for learning. And it's just been really inspirational to me to see the way her daughters are always involved in projects, not just helping, but spearheading a lot of them. And they're older, so they can do that. They can come up with an idea and really run with it. So that's something I'm looking forward to with my kids as well. And then try to find people who had a particular connection to that chapter. So it's a fermentation chapter. I interviewed Shannon Stonger, who has a book coming. Well, she has a brand new book about off-grid living, but another book about fermentation. And she writes about fermentation. So she just, she knows it like the back of her hand. It's funny because I think, like what you were mentioning about growing up in a village where everybody just does those things. I think sometimes the homesteading families who just do those things, they don't think it's anything remarkable. So they're all so modest and humble. And they don't like, I sort of had to like tease out the part from the interview and really highlight, because they might not think it's phenomenal that they involve their children every day in fermentation, but it is really phenomenal.
And that's something you mentioned a lot. Having your children help kind of triples the time you need for a project.
Right.
That help really means more work. But at the same time, when they get older, that's the foundation for them to be self-sufficient. And I used to have a store, and I would hire like 16, 17-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
And their parents had done everything for them. They didn't even know how to sweep the floor or anything.
Wow.
And it was, for me as an employer, it was a nightmare.
Right.
I stopped doing that, because it's like, no, you need to know basic. So you were also talking about Waldorf education, which is very much oriented around learning from an activity.
Waldorf education in particular, I mean, one of the reasons I was drawn to it, which totally makes sense, is that it's so connected to the seasons and to nature. And, there's all these seasonal festivals, and the children, especially when they're really young, are outside all the time. It just made so much sense for our lifestyle. And even the school that the kids are going to now, they have such a beautiful connection to the piece of land the school's on. And, my son came home the other day with these little bags of herbal tea that they had made, and they had gone to the garden, collected the herbs, dried the herbs, then they stripped them from the plant, and they made little tea bags out of coffee filters, which I thought, man, that's a great idea. I should have put that in my book.
There you go. There you go.
That's the bonus. I need to write that up, because what a great idea. So he came home with these 2 little tea bags that he had made from herbs that they had collected. And I just thought, oh, that's just so beautiful. It's just a sweet, sweet lesson on how to create something that's nourishing and warming and healing from a plant that you have cultivated.
And I'm sure that tea tastes like way better than when you went to the store and you get it. So to make it even more sustainable, you could make little fabric bags, which can
Right,
be
right.
washed. Because when you think about it, if you go to the store, there is so much waste involved in
I
just
know.
buying tea
Mhm.
in tea bags, right? You have a box which is wrapped in cellophane or some plastic thing, and and then each tea bag has a little metal staple and it's
Yeah.
like amazing how much waste goes in there. And that's a project I would think anybody could do. Like you could grow herbs
Mhm.
on your windowsill
Yeah,
in an
absolutely.
apartment even.
Absolutely. Herbs are a great thing for people who have a balcony, windowsill. And you're right. I mean, you can even steep the herbs in, one of those silver tea balls or in a mesh strainer or something. So
Right.
you eliminate the waste because it's true, there is a lot involved in tea.
Yeah, we break it down and go for each thing we use in our house, what is really
Mhm.
involved in it and how can we do it different? So what was the funnest project for you to research while you were writing this book?
Yeah, the projects were definitely a combination of things that I just do all the time with my kids or just in our home. So it wasn't anything I had to like research per se, but just put it into a format that was kid friendly and talk about the aspects of that project that were like specific to kids. So some of the things like kombucha, yogurt making, we do those things all the time. And I just had to sort of write up how that all works. But some of the things like were pretty new to me, but I was excited about them. So I wanted to include them in the book. And probably my favorite was making the acorn flour and then the pancakes.
Yeah, I read that and I'm like, yeah, because here again in San Diego, that's what First Nation people were
Right.
eating. And I was always like, how could I do that? And so that was very
Yeah.
cool to see. Do you want to describe the process a
Yeah,
little bit?
it's really fun. So, you can't really just take an acorn and just start chomping on it. It's filled with tannins and, bitter and whatnot. So the way you do it is you need to soak the acorns in water and leach some of the tannins out so it becomes more palatable. And so we got last year we just had this like bumper crop of bur oak acorns, and I didn't know it at the time until I started looking into it that apparently bur oaks are one of the more tasty acorns. They're large, they're meaty, they don't have a ton of tannins, so they were actually really easy to work with. You need to crack them and you need to get the actual meat out of the acorn, right? What we did is we put it through a grinder. We have one of those like metal Corona grinders that you use for grinding meat or flour and stuff. So my son Everett he just loved the process. He's very focused, very methodical. Like he's just the person who can sit and really focus on a task. He cracked them all and put them in the grinder, grinding it up into meal. And so then you have this acorn meal. And then you put that into jars of water and you let it sit and soak. And you'll see that the water becomes red. Those are the tannins leaching out, and you just kind of keep changing the water for however many days it takes until you can eat the acorn meal and it doesn't taste bitter and astringent. And then once you have that, you can either just use it right away in making, bread, pancakes, adding it to muffins, cookies, or you can dry that. Like you could take the meal and dehydrate it and turn it into more of like a flour. But most of what we did, I tried making pancakes with just the acorn flour, the acorn meal, no wheat flour. And it was pretty good, but it was a very intense flavor and very filling. So most of the time what we did is we took the acorn flour, we just cut it 50% with wheat flour, and then you still get a little bit of the rise of wheat flour, but you get this like nutty, meaty taste. It was really fun and really tasted quite delicious, actually.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
very cool. It definitely makes me want to go out there and look for oak trees. Like we said, there's so much food out there, but we might not even know it is food. So
Right.
that sounds like a really fun project. How old is your son?
He's 7 now, almost 8.
So yeah,
Mhm.
so that was something a young child can do.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the most challenging part was probably cracking the acorns, but the grinding, young kids can help with that. And they really love it. It's all this like physical tactile work, the shaking of the jar of butter, the cranking, stirring, young kids love that. And it's so physical, it's good for their bodies, and then you see this finished product that they have taken part in creating, and it's really satisfying.
So did they love the pancakes? Did they eat the ones which were pure acorn flour or not so much?
No, I think I was the only one that ate those because at the time we made them, I wasn't eating any wheat or grain, so I just tried those, but everybody else had them mixed
Yeah.
with the flour.
Well, a lot
Yeah.
of times when you introduce a new taste, it's good to introduce it slowly, right? Because if it's so foreign, our taste buds don't even know what to do with it.
Right, exactly. And that meal, like, it was such an awesome meal because it was the acorn flour pancakes that we had made from the acorns, and then the butter, which you can make in a jar. So we had the homemade butter, and then we had black walnut syrup that we made that, we poured over the pancakes, and all those projects are on the book. So you could make, an entire breakfast out of things that you can find out in the wild or,
It really does sound like a lot of
yeah.
fun. So a lot of the foods you're talking about are like ferments and wild gathered foods, which a lot of times have a stronger flavors. And when you're growing up with the very typical American diet,
Mhm.
they taste like very foreign.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips when people want to change the diet for the kids, how to make that a good transition?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. It's funny because my kids grew up eating sauerkraut, and they loved it as babies, like loved it. I don't know what it was. As babies, they just like went crazy over it. So one of the recipes I have in the book is for like a fermented carrot stick. And I think that's actually a really good one to start with because the carrots themselves are sweet, and the fermentation process, you can add whatever extra spices you want. I made a batch that had cinnamon stick in it, and it just kind of brought out like the sweetness of the carrot a little bit more. And then you're not so much getting that like sour flavor that a lot of the ferments have, but you're getting a little bit more of like a sweet tangy. Something like that might be a good starting point. I know my kids also, if we're eating sauerkraut, which is, such an easy ferment, if we're eating it, they really prefer if I stop the fermentation a little bit earlier and put it in the fridge. So you have something that's still a little bit crispy. It still has tang, but it's not like crazy tangy. Whereas, like my husband might prefer us to like let it continue fermenting on the counter for another few days. So I'll stop the fermentation early for them, and I'll just put it in the fridge, and they like it that way. Or I'll make something that has a blend, like I'll do red cabbage, white cabbage, or green cabbage, and carrots, just to make it like a little crisp, a little sweet because of the carrots, and just kind of add some different stuff there.
Yeah, when we were kids, we hated sauerkraut because we would make it in this big crock, and it would just sit in the basement, and then you go and get whatever you need. But we would do a lot of sauerkraut salads for dinner, like chop them up and add other vegetables to it. But it becomes very sour if it just keeps sitting there. So was definitely a sour
Okay.
experience. And then as an adult, I really started to love it.
Oh, yeah.
When you were interviewing families,
Yeah.
did you talk to any kids which grew up in a homestead and are adults now and have moved on, or that didn't come up?
Um, I didn't ask specifically about that, but I know that when I was kind of informally sort of checking in with people I knew had older children, sort of the same message kind of kept coming up, which was, they may not be interested in homesteading as teenagers or as young adults, and that's okay. You can still have family rules that if people are living in the house and you help add to, the food preparation, or you do some chores, but just acknowledging that like kids have their own interests, and they may or may not be interested in homesteading as their thing.
Yeah, I was just interested if that came about, because sometimes you grow up in a certain lifestyle and that's what you do your
Right.
life, and other people are just like, oh,
Right.
I never ever want to have to do that. It's so much work. And
Interesting.
like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
homeschooled and none of my kids are homeschooling. Like my daughter was saying, we
Mhm.
really loved being homeschooled, but it's so much work. I'm not going to do that. So
Yeah, it's a lot of work for sure. Yeah, and I mean, I totally get that because my husband and I both grew up in the suburbs. We didn't grow up homesteading. He probably had a little bit more of a basis than I did because his dad was collecting rainwater off the roof, and they had a little garden. They had some chickens and stuff like that. So they had a little tiny bit of like a suburban homestead thing going on, but that wasn't the main focus of their life the way it is for like our kids now. We had to learn all these skills as adults, and it's been years and years of learning. I'm still learning, of course. Whereas for my kids, it's just kind of like it's just sort of what they've always known. They haven't known anything different. One nice thing about Vermont, and also kind of nice thing about where we were living in Missouri, it's such a farming culture there. And here there's a big farming, homesteading culture too. So when you go to other people's houses, chances are that there is a garden in the front yard or a few chickens roaming around. It really normalizes it, which is nice. It's very sweet.
yeah, absolutely. It will be interesting to see how your life changes now, because it's a big step you did. And actually, do you want to talk a little bit about your transition? Because I read that you lived in a tent for a while and that you also lived in a tent when you first got to your land.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I know. Well, so when we started our homestead in Missouri, we started out with raw land. So we basically set up an outdoor kitchen and we had a tent and we just lived out in the tent camping for like 6 or 7 months while we built the house, and then we were able to move into the house, and it was unfinished and we still didn't have running water or electricity for quite some time. When we moved here just a month ago, we had found this amazing rental, and it's so perfect in so many ways, and it really we're doing a little bit of a work trade, so we were able to make it a little bit more affordable. And it came with chickens, and there's a sugar bush so we can tap the maples, and there's a little garden spot, so it just was lovely. But we weren't able to move in right away. So we just came out here and set up a tent at a campground, and we were camping for the first few weeks of being here. But it's like after having done that for so long in Missouri, it doesn't phase us at all. We all actually really loved it. The campground was right on a river. It was really beautiful, and we just kind of had a nice, sweet, relaxing, just when we got back from school and work and craziness of the day, it was just nice to like get to that campsite and just sort of take a little breath and enjoy the river. And that was kind of fun.
right, you have online businesses, right?
But yeah, I was able to set up my computer at a friend's house, and I was able to make it work for my business.
Do you want to tell us really quickly what your other businesses are?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So my main business is my blog, Homestead-Honey, which I write about homesteading, gardening, fermentation, food preservation, just all of the stuff that we've kind of talked about today. And through Homestead-Honey, I sell all the books that I've written. So I have one, it's called Creating Off-Grid Homestead. I have one that's about fall gardening. And then my husband and I together wrote 2 books about, one is how to build a brick wood-fired bread oven, and the other is how to build a root cellar. Those have all the how-tos and step-by-step instructions on how to build. So those are all available on Homestead-Honey, which is homestead-honey.com. And then also through my website, through Homestead-Honey, I also run group coaching programs for women, and I work with people one-on-one as well. So I am a life and business coach, and that's something I really love. And most of people who work with me are people who are excited about more sort of simple lifestyle, homesteading, and they're just trying to figure out how to make it all work for them, how to balance life and homesteading and jobs and children sometimes. And that's been a really wonderful thing. And that's why, I think a lot of the feminine energy that you were mentioning earlier, like, it kind of comes from my working with so many different people and in this coaching capacity. It doesn't do any good to tell somebody that they should do this, and this, because, if they don't have the capacity to do that, it's just going to turn into overwhelm. So the way I approach, my coaching is to really get clear about what your vision is, what your values are, what's the most important thing to you, and then start to hone in on the things that you're passionate about and find one or two baby steps that you can take to start making changes in your life. And so those types of themes come out in my website, they come out in the book, they're sort of just woven through everything that I do with my business.
Yeah, thank you. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Is there something else you would really like to tell us today?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And of course, I'd love it if people wanted to check out the book, which I don't know if we even said. It's called Family Homesteading. It's available starting on October 16th. And it's available, of course, it will be available after October 16th on my website, but it's also, the large online retailers, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, IndieBound, stuff like that. So that's really the most exciting thing I have going on right now, is just getting this book out into the world and hoping that it makes a difference and helps people connect with nature and the seasons and to their families in a deeper way.
Thank you so much. I think it's very needed and it's beautiful. Like you said, it's laid out really nice. The pictures are beautiful. It makes you excited, like I was like, yeah, I want to do some acorns. I want to do some doable. I can do this, and I can do that with kids. I have 4, 5, and 7-year-olds available to me right now.
Oh, fun. So fun. Yeah, that's such a great age. Yeah.
So curious. Well, thank you so very much.
Oh, it's been so much fun. Thanks so much for having me.
If you have children, or even if you don't have children, I hope this interview and Teri's book is going to inspire you to do some small homesteading tasks, or big ones, but start out with the small ones. I certainly got inspired to do things with my grandchildren, like the butter making. I just hadn't thought about it before, that it could be done in such an easy way. Maybe that's one of my problems, that I always think too big and make things too complicated. So, lesson for all of us: let's make it easier on ourselves. If you like our work, we would love for you to support us on Patreon, patreon.com, Sustainable Living Podcast. As little as $1 makes a huge difference for us. So consider it, check it out. There are times where I'm very active there, posting a lot, and then there are other times where I'm so overwhelmed with all the tasks in my life that I don't get online very much. Actually, in past podcasts, I have promised to do little lenses, daily lenses, and something is going on with my phone that it hasn't been loading them. So I've been doing them, and then they just disappear into I don't know where, but they are not showing up on Patreon. I'm trying to fix my phone because that's important so that I can do things like that, show us what we're up to. Hopefully, I will get back to that and have lots of little tiny updates for you. Also, you can see us on Facebook. Every Friday at 9 a.m., Emily and I have Friday morning chat. And we talk about all kinds of different issues or just fun things we found. If you're listening to it later, we are also cross-posting those videos slowly to our YouTube channel. But this week we talked a lot about Emily's experience working for the American Tiny Home Association, what it means to get more organized about legislation and so forth. So you might find it interesting. As always, we love to hear from you. Sustainable Living Podcast at gmail.com. Instagram, Facebook, all of those places, we are there. Take care and thank you so much for listening. We love you. Bye for now.